There's a place where color goes to die. Not darkness exactly. Darkness is the absence of light, and you can survive darkness. This is something worse. This is a plane where light exists but achieves nothing. Where it falls flat against gray stone and gray sky and gray soil and simply stops, as though even photons lose the will to bounce. Travelers who cross into this place for the first time describe the sensation not as stepping into shadow, but as having something taken from them. A warmth behind the sternum, the specific memory of laughter, the desire to continue. This is the Shadowfell, and somewhere in its deepest reaches is a place built from obsidian and stolen memory. A goddess waits. She waits, attended by ravens with too much intelligence behind their eyes, surrounded by towers filled with the last thoughts of the dying, ruling a court of gray-skinned elves who cut and pierce and tattoo their own flesh not from madness but from desperate necessity. She is the Raven Queen. She has no other name, and if she once had one, that knowledge is either lost or deliberately kept from us. If you want to understand death, not the polite theological version, not the version that offers resurrection and divine reward, but the mechanism underneath everything that breathes, then you need to understand her. To understand the Raven Queen, you first have to understand the plane she inhabits, because no being exists apart from the reality that surrounds them, and the Shadowfell is a reality unlike any other. The multiverse has architecture. The material plane sits at something like a center point, and arrayed around it are reflections and echoes. The Feywild burning bright and wild on one side, overflowing with life and magic and primal feeling, and the Shadowfell on the other. Where the Feywild is the material plane dreaming beautifully, the Shadowfell is the material plane dreaming badly. Every mountain range on the material plane has a corresponding ridge of dark stone in the Shadowfell. Every forest has its shadow version, the same trees approximately but hollow looking, their leaves drained of color, their roots going somewhere they shouldn't. Cities that stand on the material plane often have ghost echo versions in the Shadowfell, sometimes populated, sometimes not, sometimes populated by things that wear the shape of the original inhabitants but are no longer quite those people. The geography mirrors, but it does not replicate. Scale shifts without warning. A forest that spans 10 miles on the material plane might span 40 in the Shadowfell, or 2, and the traveler walking through it has no reliable way to know which until they've already gotten lost. The geography is not the dangerous part. The dangerous part is what the plane does to the mind. Scholars who study planar theory call it the Shadowfell's entropic pull. The plane leeches. Spend a day in the Shadowfell and you feel vaguely sad without knowing why. Spend a week and the vague sadness becomes a settled heaviness, a conviction that nothing matters much. Spend a month and you stop caring whether you eat. Spend long enough and you stop caring about anything at all. You sit down somewhere and simply cease to try, and the Shadowfell takes what's left of you. This is not a magical affliction in the conventional sense. You cannot remove it with dispel magic. It is the plane's natural state, its ambient quality. The Shadowfell is a place of endings, and it communicates this to everything inside it constantly, at a level below conscious thought. Every living creature that enters feels the weight of its own eventual death pressing down from every direction. The Dungeon Master's Guide includes an optional rule on this effect. When the DM deems it appropriate, characters not native to the Shadowfell must make a DC 10 Wisdom saving throw, or acquire a Despair effect. The damage table produces 3 results. Apathy, which leaves the character convinced they cannot make a difference to anyone or anything. Dread, which leaves them certain the plane is going to kill them. And madness, in which they can no longer tell what is real. None of these are active impulses, they're states of surrender or dissolution. Different flavors of the same fundamental condition. Something in the person has stopped. The Shadowfell is also suffused with necrotic energy, the same energy that powers necromantic magic and animates undead, and bleeds that energy into the wider multiverse. This is not incidental to the Raven Queen's situation. She presides over the plane that produces the raw material of the thing she most opposes. Whether this was a deliberate choice or an unavoidable consequence of claiming the only available domain of death is a question the theological literature has not resolved. Pushed far enough, contact with its necrotic saturation can produce something worse than despair. The Nightwalker is what is left when someone attempts to draw directly on the negative plane, the dark layer adjacent to the Shadowfell, and fails entirely. The attempt consumes them and replaces them with an enormous undead creature of living shadow, the person gone entirely, existing now only to devour life. They are among the most dangerous thing the Shadowfell's proximity to that deeper darkness can produce. The question planar scholars have argued over for centuries is a simple one. Was the Shadowfell always this way, or did something make it this way? The answer, as best anyone can determine, is both. The Shadowfell predates the Raven Queen. She did not create it. She claimed it, and over the long ages of her rule she has shaped it. But the foundation was already there. The plane was always a place of shadow and endings. What the Raven Queen added was intention. What preceded her rule is a question that resolves differently depending on which tradition you consult. 4th edition sources are the most explicit. A god named Nerul, a deity of death as cruelty who found pleasure in killing for its own sake, was killed by the being who would become the Raven Queen. She seized his divine portfolio in the moment of his death, then established her domain in the Shadowfell. His own realm in the 4E cosmological architecture was the divine dominion of Pluton, separate from the Shadowfell, which she chose as her seat of power after its destruction. 5th edition sources, specifically the Dungeon Master's Guide, are more guarded. They describe her as a mortal wizard who mastered death magic and claimed the Shadowfell without naming any predecessor. Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes offers a third telling, more detailed than either. She was an elven queen from the Feywild, and death was not her goal, but the catastrophe that found her on the way to something else entirely. That account deserves its own section. What all 3 traditions agree on is the shape of what came before her. A plane ruled by death as violence rather than death as inevitability. A domain of harvested souls rather than tended ones. Whatever the specific theology, her arrival changed the fundamental character of the Shadowfell. And that change, even if it produced a plane that is still deeply hostile to the living, is considered by most death scholars an improvement. The bar admittedly was not high. Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes gives the Raven Queen an origin far more specific and far more tragic than either the 4E or the 5E Dungeon Master's Guide accounts. According to this telling, and Jeremy Crawford, who co-wrote it, has confirmed its intents directly, she was not originally a death goddess at all. She was an elven queen of the Feywild, and death was the catastrophe that found her on the way to something else. The context is the ancient war between Corellon and Lolth. That conflict was tearing the elven people apart, splitting them between 2 divine powers with incompatible visions, producing the fracture that would eventually create the Drow. This elf queen watched her people fracture and made a decision. If she could marshal enough magical power to ascend to godhood, she could have the standing to appeal to both sides, to broker a peace, to forge a road back to Arvindor, the elven heaven from which the conflict had effectively exiled her people. She rallied her followers, those who would become the Shadar-kai, and performed a grand ritual. The followers pledged their souls and their magic to her, pooling their essence to elevate her towards divinity and forge a path back to Arvindor. It was, by all accounts, working. She was ascending. The door to Arvindor was opening. Then the ritual was sabotaged from within. A group of evil wizards among her own followers, inside the ritual, participants in the ceremony rather than external attackers, saw what was happening and chose a different use for it. They attempted to divert the flow of soul energy being channeled through the ritual, directing it into themselves, not attacking the queen from outside, feeding off the ritual they had helped build, turning their queen's ascension into a personal power source. She realized what they were doing. She punished them on the spot. A burst of divine fury that settled their fate permanently. But the punishment corrupted the ritual in the moment of its delivery. The pathway to Arvindor collapsed. The siphon reversed. The queen, her followers, and the treacherous wizards were all dragged into the Shadowfell together, and the queen's mortal body died in the catastrophe. She had accumulated enough power in the ritual that her soul did not simply disperse. It reformed, coalescing with the ambient sorrow and the shadow of the Shadowfell, fusing with the plane's own character until a new being took shape, the Raven Queen. Not the Elven Queen, something different, something made of the Shadowfell as much of what she had been, with a fractured and mostly lost connection to the mortal life that had preceded all of this. The wizard she had cursed in the moment of catastrophe became the Nagpa. Her followers, their souls already bound to the ritual, became the first Shadar-kai. Corlon and Lolth, furious at the Queen's presumption in trying to resolve their conflict, erased her name and elven memory entirely, which is why she has no name now. The event itself was removed from elven history. The Raven Queen exists, in part, as a consequence of having been deliberately forgotten by the divine powers who shaped the elven people. The Mordenkainen Tome of Foes account changes the Raven Queen's character significantly. Her obsession with memory makes a different kind of sense when her very existence began with a catastrophic act of forgetting, and when the divine powers who shaped her original people deliberately erased what she had been. She's not merely a death goddess who happens to collect memories. She is a being whose identity was destroyed by erasure, now preserving what everyone else lets slip away. The transformation stripped her of something essential. She could remember the broad architecture of her mortal life, that she had been someone, that she had done something enormous, that she had wanted something very much. But the specific content of those memories, her name, her face before it became the mask she wears now, the people she had known, the reason she had decided what she decided, those things became fragmentary, distant, and then mostly gone. This loss is the defining act of her personality and her rule. The Raven Queen is a god who does not fully know who she was. She collects memories, specifically the final memories of the dying, because memory is the thing she lost and the thing she craves and the thing she decided to protect in others precisely because it was taken from her. Her palace, the fortress of memories, is not simply a grand divine dwelling. It's an archive, an obsessive, infinitely detailed archive of the last things people knew before they stopped knowing anything. The ravens she sends into the mortal world are collectors. When a creature dies, her ravens are often nearby, and they carry something back to her. Not the soul, which moves on through the mechanics of death to whatever awaits it, but the imprint of the final moment, the last image, the last thought. The last thing a person was thinking when thinking stopped. She preserves these. She's the only being in existence who keeps such records. If you want to know what your ancestor was thinking when they died, the Raven Queen knows. She will not necessarily tell you, but she knows. From the outside, it can look like obsession, like hoarding, like a god who cannot move on from a wound sustained at the moment of her creation. But there is a coherent philosophy underneath it. Memory distinguishes a life from a duration. It makes a person rather than simply a biological process. And death is the point at which memory becomes permanent. It cannot be added to, cannot be distorted by future experience, cannot be rewritten. The last thought of a dying creature is, in some sense, the truest thing about them. She guards these truths. Whether she does so out of care or compulsion or some combination is a question her own servants disagree about in the gray corridors of her palace. In Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes account, the Raven Queen no longer possesses or manifests a physical form. She appears instead as a miscellany of symbols, perceptions, and images. A voice from the air of the throne room, a swirl of ravens, a shadow that implies a presence without committing to one. The catastrophe that made her also unmade her body, fusing her with the Shadowfell until the boundary between the deity and the plane is no longer entirely clear. The iconography associated with her, a gown of black feathers, a white porcelain mask, is the way artists, worshippers, and the Shadar-kai depict her. It is the face she presents when she chooses to present one, and it may reflect how she appeared in the moment before the catastrophe, or how she appeared in the immediate aftermath, or how she chooses to be understood. The mask and the gown are real in the sense that they're consistent across accounts spanning many ages. Whether they constitute a literal physical form is a more complicated question. The gown carries obvious symbolism. Feathers signal the ravens, the collectors, the watchers, the things that carry her presence into the world. There are accounts of the Raven Queen appearing as nothing but a mass of ravens moving in close formation, the flock taking on the rough shape of a figure. Whether the gown and the birds are different things or the same thing in different states is not a question anyone has been able to answer from outside the fortress. The mask is more interesting. A being of memory who shows a masked face is not an accident of iconography. The white porcelain mask communicates something specific. She will not be recognized. She who holds the last memories of everyone who has ever died has made herself unrecognizable. To supplicants, to enemies, to old allies who might have known her before she became what she is. Some scholars read this as protection. Others read it as grief, a face hidden because the person who once wore it no longer entirely exists. A third reading, less comfortable than either. She wears a mask because whatever is underneath it no longer resembles anything that would be useful to show. Her divine portfolio encompasses 3 aspects: death, fate, and winter. Death and fate receive most of the theological attention. Winter is treated as a footnote. Winter is the material plane's most direct echo of the Shadowfell, the season in which the world goes gray and still, in which growth stops, in which the landscape empties of color and warmth in the ambient noise of living things. A person standing in the Shadowfell for the first time and a person standing in a field in deep winter are experiencing versions of the same thing. The sense that something is withdrawn, that the world is holding its breath, and the energy driving everything forward has paused. The difference is that winter ends. The Shadowfell does not. Her claim on winter is not about cold as a weapon or frost as shorthand for death, though those associations exist in popular theology. It's about suspension, the moment between the last dying thing and the first new growth. The world held between what it was and what it will be. Every winter on every world in the multiverse is briefly hers. Not because she causes it, but because that condition of suspension is her fundamental territory. And winter is what it looks like when the material plane touches the edge of that territory and pulls back. Fate is about inevitability. Winter is one of the most inevitable things in the natural world. It arrives regardless of what anyone does or wants, with a certainty that has nothing to do with anyone's choices. Her 3 aspects are the same concern at different scales. The ending that cannot be avoided, the record of what was, and the suspension between one state and the next. 3 descriptions of a single thing. At the heart of Shadowfell stands the Fortress of Memories. It is not a name given by poets, it's a functional description. The structure is vast. Travelers who have seen it and returned describe architecture that doesn't behave according to normal rules. Towers certainly taller than towers should be able to be. Courtyards that open into other courtyards in sequences that don't track geometrically. Halls that run perfectly level for what feels like miles before depositing you somewhere that should be underground but has a ceiling. It is built from obsidian and from a dark stone that has no name in common trade languages, and from what appears to be solidified shadow, a description that scholars of the arcane find frustrating and everyone else finds unsettling. The interior is cold in the way a room is cold when it hasn't been lived in, the cold of absence. No laughter has ever echoed in these corridors. No celebrations have taken place in these halls. The palace is not a home, it's a place of function and of waiting. The Raven Queen does not manifest here as a fixed physical presence. What supplicants encounter is more variable. Sometimes only ravens, dozens of them watching from every surface, and a voice that comes from nowhere and everywhere at once. Sometimes a figure implied by a swirl of shadow. Occasionally something more defined, a shape on a throne of black iron, the white porcelain mask of her iconography turned towards whoever has come to speak. She does not make small talk. She asks one question generally and listens to the answer. And then she says what she has to say or she doesn't, and the audience ends. There are accounts spanning different ages and different observers that suggest the fortress has grown over time, that sections documented by one generation of scholars cannot be located by the next, that the structure visible today is larger than any description from 300 years prior. The Shadar-kai who served within it do not enter every wing. Some portions of the palace simply do not connect to the rest of the structure from the inside. Rooms that appear on no map, accessible, if at all, only by routes that shift. Whether this is evidence that the fortress grows or evidence that the fortress has always been larger than anyone has fully mapped is a question that even her most devoted servants cannot answer. Who are the Shadar-kai? Once the Shadar-kai were elves. They're not a separate species that merely resembles elves. They're the descendants of those who pledged their souls to the Elven Queen's ritual and were pulled into the Shadowfell when it catastrophically failed. They did not choose to come to the Shadowfell in the sense of deliberate migration. The ritual went wrong and they were dragged here, and the Shadowfell changed them over generations in ways they could not reverse. Their skin took on gray undertones. Their hair faded. The vitality that makes elves the near-immortal beings that they are. The primal connection to the Feywild. The relationship with life as a kind of natural magic. That connection was not severed, but attenuated, stretched thin across the distance between the Shadowfell and the life magic that had originally formed it. When Shadar-kai leave the Shadowfell and return to the material plane, they appear younger and more vital. When they return to the Shadowfell, the age reasserts itself. The gray, the withering, the weight. The plane does not release what it claims. The path back to Corellon in the Seldarine is permanently closed to them. When a Shadar-kai dies, their soul does not pass into the elven afterlife cycle. It returns to the Raven Queen directly and they are resurrected in the Shadowfell, bound to serve again. Some of her followers regard this as a blessing. Death is simply a temporary interruption, not a conclusion. Others experience it at the fullest expression of what the Covenant actually cost them. Not just their mortal life, but every life after. There is no rest for the Shadar-kai. There is only service, ended briefly by death, resumed in the Shadowfell. And the emotional suppression began, not as a consequence of their binding to her, but as a consequence of the plane they now inhabit permanently. Living in the Shadowfell means living with constant entropic pressure. The plane tells you without words and without pause that nothing matters and everything ends. Most mortals cannot withstand this for long. The Shadar-kai found a way to withstand it, but the cost of their method is visible in everything they do and everything they are. They became experts in sensation. The Shadowfell suppresses pleasure as efficiently as any other emotional state. What the Shadar-kai discovered was that the plane's numbing effect could be temporarily countered by intense physical sensation. Pain, primarily because pain is difficult to suppress and because the body's response is not meditated by the same emotional channels the Shadowfell interferes with. But also joy, beauty, horror. Anything that hits hard enough to cut through the gray weight pressing down from every direction. This is why every Shadar-kai is tattooed. It is why they pierce their skin with metal and bone. It's why they practice forms of martial training that involve degrees of self-inflicted pain that human observers tend to find shocking and that elven observers from other traditions find nearly incomprehensible. They're not hurting themselves from self-destructive impulse. They're doing maintenance. They're performing the ongoing labor of remaining a feeling creature in a place that wants to make them not feel. The Shadar-kai who fall behind on this labor develop a kind of terminal numbness, the way cold produces frostbite, patient and without malice. The emotional suppression becomes permanent. Those in this state are not quite dead and not quite alive. They sit. They speak if spoken to minimally. They perform basic functions if instructed to. They're the closest thing to ghost that a living person can become without crossing the threshold of actual death. The Raven Queen does not punish them when this happens. She tends to them. She collects their remaining memories, preserves what was left of who they were. It is the most mercy she appears capable of. Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes distinguishes 3 types of Shadar-kai in active service. The Gloomweaver manipulates shadow as a medium for spellcasting and operates as an agent and information gatherer, moving through the Shadowfell's distorted geography with the ease of someone for whom shadow is a native environment. The Shadow Dancer is a martial specialist, the type most likely to be encountered on the material plane, fast and difficult to pin down, able to step through darkness the way a person steps through a doorway. The Soulmonger is what happens when a Shadar-kai has been in service long enough that the suppression has been internalized and weaponized. A Soulmonger drains vitality from living creatures. not killing them outright but extracting something from the act of being alive, leaving behind a hollowness that looks from the outside identical to the Shadowfell's own ambient despair. They are carrying the plane with them. They have become an extension of its character rather than creatures living within it. Their existence raises a question the Shadar-kai find genuinely uncomfortable. At what point does survival inside the Shadowfell become indistinguishable from being consumed by it? The civilization the Shadar-kai have built in the Shadowfell is the most alive thing in a plane that is fundamentally inimical to life. Their art forms are extraordinary and strange. Shadowfell art is rarely beautiful in the way that word is used in sunlit places. It's intense, it is precise. It reaches for the thing it is depicting with a kind of desperate sincerity that art in more comfortable circumstances rarely achieves. Because comfortable circumstances don't make the kind of artist that desperation makes. Shadar-kai painters use pigments that don't exist on the material plane. Shadar-kai musicians play instruments designed to create sounds and frequency ranges that are physically uncomfortable, because discomfort is sensation and sensation is survival. Shadar-kai sculptors work in shadow material that shifts depending on how close you stand to it, creating pieces that are different at every distance. Their social structures are organized around the service of the Raven Queen, but not in the way a theocratic society is organized around its god. The Raven Queen provides something they genuinely need in return for their service: purpose. Purpose is one of the most effective counters to the Shadowfell's entropic pull. A creature with no purpose will succumb to the gray weight eventually. A creature with a clear and significant purpose can hold it off for centuries. That's not worship. It is a working arrangement with stakes on both sides. Gloomrot is the most prominent city in the Shadowfell that mortals are likely to encounter. A settlement built at the edge of the plane's geography where it becomes permeable to travel from the material plane. It's a city where commerce happens, where factions operate, where information can be bought and sold. The 4th edition sourcebook Gloomrot and Beyond describes it in detail, characterized by buildings that shift and rearrange between visits, where longtime residents have partially succumbed to the plane's suppressive effect and conduct their business with the flat efficiency of people who have forgotten how to want things. 5th edition sources do not update these details at length, but the broader strokes, a functional city operating under the permanent weight of the plane's despair, holds across editions. There's trade in Gloomrot, there is negotiation. There's something that technically resembles normal urban life. There is not, in any reliable sense, joy. Where the Shadar-kai are elves transformed by the Shadowfell, the Sorrowsworn are something else. They are what the Shadowfell grows on its own. Mordenkainen's Tome introduces the Sorrowsworn as creatures native to the plane. Not undead, not creatures from elsewhere that wandered in, but entities born directly from the Shadowfell's ambient emotional energies. Each type embodies a specific register of despair. The lonely manifest from the Shadowfell's isolation, drawing towards living creatures with a terrible neediness, attacking anything that tries to leave their vicinity. The lost are born from the plane's disorientation, wandering without direction and pulling travelers into their own confusion. The hungry express the specific despair of endless craving without satisfaction. The wretched are the most numerous and the most visually distressing. Small, numerous, formed from raw misery. The angry are the most dangerous, born from the rage that the Shadowfell's suppression eventually produces in those who cannot stop resisting it. What makes the Sorrowsworn significant for any account of the Raven Queen's domain is the question of her relationship to them. In 5th edition sources, they are not her creatures. She did not make them and does not command them. They are the plane itself expressing its character in physical form. Despair given body and appetite. 4th edition sources tell a different story. There, the Sorrowsworn served explicitly as her soldiers, hunting enemies of her domain, and Shadar-kai aspired to ascend and become one. Both readings are available depending on which edition of lore a DM prefers. In the 5th edition framing, her presence in the Shadowfell did not prevent the Sorrowsworn from arising. Whether she chooses not to eliminate them or whether they are too fundamental to the plane's nature to be removed is one of the questions her servants tend to avoid asking directly. They represent the Shadowfell's baseline. The Shadar-kai fight against what the plane wants to make them. The Sorrowsworn are what the plane makes when nothing fights back. The Raven Queen is patient. The Nagpa are the most direct evidence of what patience combined with power produces when someone overreaches. Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes documents them as humanoids, alive, fully conscious, occupying no liminal state between life and death. They're alive in the fullest and most unambiguous sense, and that is precisely the horror. They are withered figures with the heads of vultures, immortal but stripped of most of what made their existence worth having. Once they were wizards, the most powerful among the Elven Queen's followers, scholars of exceptional ability who participated in the great ritual. They were inside it, parties to it, and at the critical moment as the door to Arvindor was opening and the Queen was ascending, they chose to redirect the soul energy flowing through the ritual into themselves. They were not attacking from outside, they were feeding off the ritual they had helped build, turning their Queen's ascension into a personal power source. She realized what they were doing. She punished them in the instant of her realization, a burst of divine fury that transformed them on the spot. And that punishment, delivered mid-ritual, corrupted the working and dragged everyone into the catastrophe. The Nagpa are therefore responsible not only for their own ruin, but for the ruin of the Queen, the Shadar-kai, and the hope of elven reunification. They know this. They have always known this, and they cannot stop knowing it. What she gave them was immortality without purpose, and then she built purpose into the curse in the cruelest way possible. The Nagpa can no longer gain magical power through conventional study or practice. The only way they can acquire new power is by taking it from the ruins of fallen civilizations, from artifacts buried in collapsed empires, from knowledge preserved only because something great was destroyed. Since ruins require civilizations to fall, and fallen civilizations are finite, the Nagpa work to create new ones. They scheme, manipulate, and maneuver at a civilizational scale, trying to engineer collapse so they have new runes to pick through. She did not make them harmless wanderers, she made them architects of catastrophe, driven to destroy exactly what they would have most wanted to build. They broker information, trade in artifacts, serve as intermediaries in transactions that require someone with no remaining reputation to protect. Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes gives them a neutral evil alignment. They're not the kind of evil that announces itself, but they will use anyone and anything that serves their remaining interests, and they do so without hesitation. They are, however, terrified of her. If the Raven Queen or her agents encounter a Nagpa, the creature does not fight. It reverts, becoming a cringing, fawning, eager to please and escape. All the scheming, all the civilizational manipulation, all the cold ruthlessness, it collapses in the presence of what made them. They are only what they are because of her, and some part of them has never stopped knowing it. She did not attend to this herself in most accounts. She noted what they had done, she responded, and then she moved on because she has a great deal else to maintain. The Queen's War. The Raven Queen's singular standing priority has remained constant since the moment she came to power. She opposes undeath. Her objection is not a political position or a competing divine interest. It's a principled one, grounded in what she understands death to be. Death is the mechanism by which existence remains coherent, by which souls move through their proper cycle, by which memory is preserved and completed and sealed. Undeath interrupts this. It creates things are stuck, neither living nor dead, neither in process nor concluded. They are, in her view, an affront to the order she embodies. Souls lost to the Shadowfell itself fall into the same category. When a creature dies in proximity to the plane's necrotic energy and fails to complete its passage, becoming instead a shadow, a specter, a wraith, an incorporeal remnant haunting the gray landscape. The Raven Queen treats this as a version of the same problem. The soul has not concluded, the memory is not sealed. Something that should have finished is stuck, and stuck things in the Shadowfell have a way of accumulating and compounding. Her agents work against this not only in the wider multiverse but within her own plane. Her conflict with Orcus is the oldest and most explicit of these wars. Orcus, the demon prince of undeath, wants her position. specifically to claim the Shadowfell, to become the presiding deity of death, rather than simply an agent of undeath operating in opposition to it. He views her domain as something that should be his. He creates undead to accumulate influence and pollute the natural process of death with his own necrotic signature. The Raven Queen and Orcus have been in a state of active low-intensity conflict for ages, and there are regions of the Shadowfell where the evidence of it is still visible in the landscape. Places where the plane's already hostile character has been further warped by divine warfare that neither side chose to clean up afterward. Vecna represents a different category of problem. Vecna achieved godhood through lichdom, a lich who willed himself into divinity through an accumulated secret knowledge and profane ritual. That ascension path is, to the Raven Queen, a specific and deliberate insult. He is proof that even divine ascension can be corrupted by undeath. His ambition towards her is concrete. Vecna specifically wants the fortress of memories and the soul flow she controls. He envies her unique ability to tap into the movement of souls and harvest knowledge from it. His servants battle her Shadar-kai actively, and his long-term goal is to displace her and rule the Shadowfell from the fortress itself. She has not destroyed him. There are limits to what even she can accomplish, but she does not allow him to rest easily. Her opposition to undeath bleeds in some theological traditions into discomfort with resurrection, the act of returning the already dead to life. From her perspective, resurrection reopens a concluded process. The final memory sealed, and ending is recorded, and pulling someone back out of death interferes with the natural architecture of existence in a way she finds philosophically repugnant. This is the position her most orthodox clerics hold, and it creates real tension in practice. Her own grave domain, the cleric subclass in Xanathar's guide to everything that most players associate with her tradition, even though Xanathar's listed example deities for the domain do not name her directly, include Raise Dead as a domain spell. Her clerics can cast it. The relationship between her doctrinal opposition to resurrection and the practical reality of what her servants are empowered to do is a nuanced one, and different theological camps within her tradition resolve this tension differently. In Forgotten Realms campaigns where both the Raven Queen and Kelemvor are present as active death deities, the contrast between them illustrates exactly what she is not. Kelemvor runs something like a divine bureaucracy, judgment, weighing, assignment of souls to appropriate afterlives. He is a god of death as a sorting mechanism. The Raven Queen is a god of death as a conclusion. She does not weigh what someone was. She keeps what they knew. This comparison is setting dependent. She is cosmological deity used across multiple campaign settings, while Kelemvor is specific to the Forgotten Realms. The Raven Queen's silence. The Raven Queen has withdrawn. The 5th edition Dungeon Master's Guide establishes her as isolated from divine affairs in a way that most gods are not, rarely communicating with other deities, focused on her own domain and the accumulation of its records, to the exclusion of the political landscape the other pantheons inhabit. She is present in the Shadowfell, present in the final moments of the dying, and present in the mind of every creature that looks at a raven and feels, without knowing why, slightly watched. Beyond that, she is largely absent from the ongoing negotiations and conflicts of divine affairs. This withdrawal is a character decision, not a limitation. She has power sufficient to participate, she simply chooses not to. The most common interpretation among death theologists is that the withdrawal is a consequence of her memory loss, that a being who does not fully know who she was is reluctant to present herself to beings who may have known her before, or who may know things about her that she cannot access herself. The Raven Queen collecting the last thoughts of the dying is partly archival work, and partly, under this reading, a search. She's looking for something specific in all that accumulated testimony, and the search requires focus the divine politics would interrupt. A darker interpretation, less popular but not without adherents, the withdrawal itself is a form of power. A god who does not speak is a god whose intentions cannot be anticipated. She exists outside every alliance, every enmity, every divine debt and obligation. Whatever she's preparing, and the prevailing view among planar scholars is she's preparing something. She's preparing it without any entity in the multiverse having reliable information about what that is. The Raven Queen is a patron. She reaches into the mortal world through 3 distinct channels: the ravens, the Shadar-kai, and the individuals she selects and grants power to directly. The Raven Queen is associated with the Hexblade Warlock patron in 5th edition D&D, the connection running through shadow-forged weapons. According to Xanathar's Guide to Everything, she forged the first weapons infused with shadow magic, sentient blades of darkness, such as the Black Razor, capable of binding with their wielders and found scattered across the multiverse in various locations. Xanathar's Guide to Everything is careful about how it frames what follows. Many sages speculate that she and the shadowy force behind these weapons are one and the same, and that the warlocks who bond with them are serving her ends whether they know it or not. That is the in-world position, scholarly speculation rather than confirmed fact, which suits her precisely. A goddess whose motives no one can fully verify, working through intermediaries whose ultimate allegiance may be something they cannot name. A dedicated Raven Queen Warlock subclass appeared in Unearthed Arcana playtest material, but was never published in a final sourcebook. The Hexblade remains the primary published avenue for her Warlock tradition. The relationship is distinct from the Shadar-kai in a meaningful way. The Shadar-kai were pulled into her service by catastrophe, their souls already bound to the ritual before they understood what it cost. Her Warlock patrons are chosen individually, approached personally, offered power in exchange for service she does not always fully explain in advance. The Warlock knows they serve her. They may not know precisely what they're serving her toward. The abilities she grants are drawn from her portfolio. The ability to peer through the eyes of ravens, to resist death, to pull information from the recently dead, to step between shadows. Her warlocks are used primarily as agents in the material plane, hands where the Shadar-kai are not present, eyes in places her ravens cannot reach or would be noticed. They receive more autonomy than most servants, and correspondingly less information. She trusts them with tasks. She does not always trust them with reasons. The relationship has an inherent asymmetry that many of her warlocks find unsettling once they understand it clearly. She knows their final memory before they have lived it. She has already seen or will see the last thought of everyone she chooses. She selected them knowing how they will end. Whether this foreknowledge influences why she chose them, or what she intends to do with what she collects from them when the time comes, is not something she volunteers. The Domains of the Dread. The Shadowfell is not only the Raven Queen's domain. She's the most prominent power in the plane, but she's not the only one, and the other presence here is, in its own way, as significant and as opaque as she is. Scattered throughout the Shadowfell, accessible through routes that shift and cannot be mapped reliably, are the Domains of Dread. Pocket-dimensional demiplanes, each one a self-contained prison. Each domain is constructed around a single individual, a Dark Lord, someone whose crimes and failures were sufficient to attract the attention of the beings responsible for these places. The Dark Lords are trapped. They cannot leave their domain voluntarily. They rule within it absolutely, but the domain is designed specifically to torment them, to provide them with proximity to everything they want while making satisfaction impossible. Strahd von Zarevich rules Barovia but cannot possess the soul he originally cursed himself to pursue. The prison in each case is tailored, specific, and relentless. The entities responsible for creating and maintaining the Domains of Dread are called the Dark Powers. Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft, published in 2021, is the primary 5th edition sourcebook on this subject, and its treatment of the Dark Powers is notable for how little it actually explains. Their nature is unknown. Whether they're collective entity, individual beings, a reflection of the Shadowfell's own entropic character given intent and agency, or something else entirely is a question the sourcebook raises without answering. It's not an oversight. It's the only honest treatment of a canonical mystery that has always meant to stay mysterious. The Dark Powers share a plane with the Raven Queen. The Domains of Dread exist within the Shadowfell, which is, at least nominally, her territory. And in canonical sources, neither entity acknowledges the other. There is no text in the 5th edition Dungeon Master's Guide or Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft that establishes communication, conflict, or even awareness between the Raven Queen and the Dark Powers. They coexist in the same plane, both collecting the damned, both watching, both keeping their own counsel. The theories about what this silence means are numerous. Some scholars of planar theology argue that the Dark Powers predate the Raven Queen's claim on the Shadowfell, and that she lacks the ability to remove them, that they are as fundamental to the plane's character as the entropic pool itself, and that her rule is simply built around them. Others argue the reverse, that she created the domains, or at least permits them because a perfectly tailored prison existence is consistent with her broader relationship to endings. A life that cannot end, trapped in permanent proximity to its own worst failures, would represent a particular kind of archival thoroughness. Still others suggest that the Dark Powers and the Raven Queen maintain a cold separation because conflict would cost more than distance. None of these theories are confirmed. The silence between these two powers is canonical, deliberate, and has never been resolved in print. The deepest secrets. Some things about the Raven Queen and her domain remain actively hidden. Not hard to find, but resistant to being found at all. She's been in the Shadowfell for an extraordinarily long time, accumulating memories, maintaining distance from the rest of the pantheons, and fighting her slow war against the forces of undeath. Divine beings of her age and power do not simply maintain, they pursue. This does not read to scholars who think carefully about it like a final state. It reads like preparation. What she's preparing for is the question no one has been able to answer. She collects the final memories of the dying, this much is established, but there are accounts, rare and difficult to verify, that suggest the archive is not simply a collection. That she is, over the course of ages, assembling something from these fragments. That the last memories of a billion dying creatures, laid out in the right order and cross-referenced in the right way, constitute a kind of document. A record of something that happened once, that was destroyed or hidden, that she's trying to reconstruct from the only evidence that survived. What this document might contain, or what she will do with it when it's complete, is not known. She's been collecting the memories of the dying for longer than most civilizations have existed. At some point, given the sheer volume of what she's accumulated, she knows things about individual mortals, people currently alive that those people do not know about themselves. Ancestral memories, inherited trauma, the last thoughts of parents and grandparents and lines of people stretching back to the first generations. She possesses a comprehensive record of choices and regrets and final recognitions that no living creature has access to. She's selective about what she shares, and her criteria for sharing or withholding are not fully understood. A tradition of death theologists has argued with more consistency than popularity that the Raven Queen is the most important deity in the pantheon, regardless of how much attention is paid to her. Every god of life and protection and light ultimately cannot deliver on their promises. The warrior dies, the king's legacy crumbles. The harvest fails eventually over long enough time. The only promise that can be kept absolutely and without exception is the one that she keeps. That what is over, that the final memory is preserved, that there is a witness to the last moment of everything that lives. She is the only deity who never loses, not because she's the most powerful, but because her domain encompasses every other domain's ultimate conclusion. Her worshippers are not numerous by the standards of the great temples. They tend to be people who have lost something, drawn to the idea of preservation rather than victory, finding comfort not in the promise of continuation, but in the promise that what was will not be forgotten. Gravediggers, mourners, those who tend the dying, the very old, the very recently bereaved. Scholars of history who understand that she holds a record no library can match. Her ravens observe, and sometimes her ravens speak, and what they say is typically precise and rarely comforting and always, in retrospect, true. The Raven Queen and Fate. A prophet declares what will happen. Fate is the underlying structure that makes what will happen inevitable. The Raven Queen's relationship with fate is not about prediction. It's about the recognition that every ending was, in some sense, always going to be that ending. Every final memory she collects was always going to be that memory. The lives she watches conclude were always going to conclude in the specific ways they concluded. She does not change fate. She does not intervene to force outcomes. She watches the inevitabilities arrive and she keeps their records. This relationship with fate gives her a perspective on the future that no being who is simply powerful, however powerful, possesses. She does not see the future as a god of prophecy sees it. She sees it as the place where all current endings are waiting. In this perspective, this knowledge of where everything is going, held alongside the archive of where everything has been, is perhaps the thing that makes her most distinctly herself. Not the power she holds, not the domain she rules, not the servants she commands. Just the knowing. The knowing that death comes for everything, including gods. The knowing that whatever she was before she became this is preserved somewhere in her own archive, filed among the other final memories, waiting for the moment when she too will need it. The knowing that Shadowfell will not be the end of the story, but that she will be there when the end of the story comes. She waits, the ravens watch, the fortress grows, the memories accumulate. The plain breathes its slow gray breath, and somewhere in the cold corridors of the fortress of memories a goddess sits with everything she has kept and everything she has lost, and she is patient in the way that only inevitable things can be patient, infinitely and without comfort and without end.